friendship that'll never ever end.
Run!
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Reaction Beanie Yo 497. In the neighborhood, my brothers and sisters. As we proceed to give you what you need, it is another Thursday. And we're about to go back to my brother from another mother. And that brother is Jose Ortiz from Evil Intentions. Back to Evil Intentions, y'all. And the title of this video is so freaking crazy, man. Check it out. 8 kids, 2 women brutally slain in Wax Museum of Horrors. The Palm Sunday Massacre. Oh my God, my brothers and sisters, we in for a tough one with this one, y'all. And the thing that I'm just wondering before we even get into it, like the main thing I'm wondering is like, whoever did this, did they plan this out? Did they plan to do this? Or did it just happen out of nowhere? You know what I'm saying, man? That's just like the major thing that I'm wondering. But dude, 8 kids and 2 women? Whoever did this, I just hope, well, whenever they do meet our maker make him wish he would have never met him. You know what I'm saying, man? But I digress. We finna go get into the freaking video. But before we get into the video, my brothers and sisters, y'all know what y'all got to do. Get whatever you may need. Get what you need, please. We back to Jose Ortiz from Evil Intentions. Y'all got what y'all need. Y'all ready to go? Then let's go.
Brooklyn, New York has well over 2 million residents across 70 different neighborhoods, all people from different walks of life who rest their heads there. Of course, the borough has undergone massive changes over the decades, and a lot has taken place. Unfortunately, some of the stories we have to remember from Brooklyn aren't the easiest to discuss. I've covered a number of them on this channel. Now, it's never my intention to reopen old wounds when it comes to revisiting these stories. It's just very important to remember the lasting effect that it had on these neighborhoods and the negative impact that it can have, even 40 years later. Now, today is going to be one of those times where I do a whole lot of talking about the borough before the video even starts. So if that's not your thing and that's not what you came here for, the timestamp you see on your screen right now is where you want to be. As always, I have to warn that the details in today's story are going to be very hard to make it through. So before you jump in, please keep that in mind. Today's story had a significant impact on the borough of Brooklyn, and it took place in April of 1984. But Brooklyn's history goes way back, and that's where our video starts.
Let's do it.
The borough of Brooklyn, New York is located on the westernmost end of Long Island, New York, separated from Manhattan by the East River and bordered by the lower and upper New York bays. At 97 square miles, with 71 of them being land and the rest being water, it's considered the second most densely populated county in the U.S., right behind Manhattan. As early as the 1600s, the land was already inhabited by the Lenape, a tribe of natives who lived all over the East Coast, in other places like New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and other parts of New York. By 1636, the Lenape would find themselves sharing the land when the Dutch settled there. Brooklyn actually derives from the word Brooklyn, a former municipality in the Netherlands where the settlers traveled from. The colony that Brooklyn was a part of would be named New Netherland. At first, things between them were peaceful, with the Lenape helping the Dutch get used to this new land, somewhere totally different from the Netherlands where they were traveling from. But by the mid-1600s, help wasn't needed as much since they now had learned how to do things for themselves. And that's when the conflicts began. Over the years, there would be many disagreements between the groups, and even with the Lenape and other natives, since many of them began competing with one another in order to make trades with the Dutch, only raising tensions. A lot of the Lenape would pass from diseases that were brought from overseas when the Dutch arrived, since their bodies hadn't built any type of immunity. It was something that they had never experienced before, and it was just one of the many challenges that they would face. The land would eventually be captured by the English during a naval attack in 1664, and this wouldn't be the last time that wars were had in the borough. By 1760, the Industrial Revolution was underway all across Western Europe and North America, lasting until around 1840. The era would see major advancements in technology, many creations, and they would forever change the way people lived. Creations like steam engines, machine tools, and advances in weaponry. And by late 1775, all through 1783, we would see the Revolutionary War, the battle between American forces and the British Army, all a part of the broader American Revolution. The largest battle during that time would be the Battle of Brooklyn, also known as the Battle of Brooklyn Heights, or the Battle of Long Island. It took place on August 27th of 1776, a bloody fight that resulted in many casualties on both sides. Leading up to and all through the 1800s, the greater Kings County had a history of slavery. But on July 4th of 1827, New York would be the first state to finally pass a law to abolish it altogether.
Whoa, time out, y'all. Jose just educated me on something that I never knew, and I feel like it's something important that I should have been known, man. The fact that New York was the first state to put an end to that slavery-ish. Wow. And I am hip on how a lot of people from the South was trying to get up north because the North period was moving away from that slavery-ish before the South. You know what I'm saying? But I didn't know that New York was the very first state. That's nice to know. Let's go.
Borough was already home to many African American families long before this, but more neighborhoods would continue to emerge and flourish over time. One of those emerging neighborhoods would be Weeksville, named after James Weeks, an African American stevedore who was originally from Virginia. It was founded in 1838 in hopes of creating a town where everything they would ever need was right where they lived. The community thrived, and Weeksville would become a historic site. Today, the area is known as Crown Heights. A lot more would change as time went on, as things continued to quickly evolve. On May 24th of 1883, Brooklyn would see the completion of the Brooklyn Bridge, a huge tourist attraction as far back as anyone can remember. It officially connected the borough to Manhattan, contributing to the greater New York that we know today. Many would find themselves in awe at how it was created, solidifying the capabilities of the technology used at the time. It would take $15 million, 14 years, and over 600 workers before it was opened. Today, about 150,000 people use the bridge every day throughout their travels and going to and from work. And for others, it's all about that one-of-a-kind view. By the time the early 1930s arrived, the Great Depression was already a devastating blow. The stock market crash of 1929 would trigger an international economic crisis, leaving millions unemployed. More African American families were affected. They would find themselves leaving Harlem, which was starting to become overcrowded and didn't have as many employment opportunities, and they would start moving to areas like Bedford-Stuyvesant, where there was a lot more space to house families. In other parts of Brooklyn, like near the Brooklyn Navy Yard, communities like Vinegar Hill would be known as Irishtown because of its growing Irish population, and in the 30s, African American families would start to move into the area. It was nothing like it is today. There were streets like Talman Street that ran between J and Bridge Street that aren't even there anymore, but its rich history is preserved through rare photographs. Now, this was a time when homes were being rented out for as low as $15 a month, but it wasn't an easy place to live in. And after the Second World War in the 1940s, areas all over the city would be targeted for urban renewal.
Can y'all imagine that, my brothers and sisters, paying $15 for freaking rent? Oh my God, I'll pay my rent up for in eternity, in an infinity, for real, man. Like, I would pay it up for some years if it was that freaking low. But another thing I just want to say real quick, y'all ever get the chance, I don't even know what you should search on YouTube, but search something like 1920s New York 4K video. Like, there's channels on YouTube now that then took the old footage from the 1900s, 1920s, late 1800s. You know what I'm saying? Where the camera back then, if you look at it, it's effed up and real grainy, like we seeing a lot right here with Jose Ortiz. But they have did whatever they did with their computer and the technology and how we live in today, the AI, whatever they using, and it's literally crystal clear footage of people walking through the streets back in the 1920s and riding on horses and stuff. And it's just a cool thing to just go see how people was living over 100 years ago. You know what I'm saying? Compared to how we are now. So if y'all ever get a chance, check that out. But I'm enjoying this pretty much history lesson that I'm getting right now from Jose about how we even get to this point in Brooklyn in 2024. Let's go.
Attempt by officials to improve the economic issues that affected a lot of families across the country. The hope was to revitalize these parts of the city, but instead, it would end up displacing over 300,000 families across the country. The renewal project would also result in the Farragut houses, completed in 1952. I had always heard of what things were like in the 70s in Farragut houses because my family was just one of the many that would call the Farragut houses home before they moved to the Upper West Side. In fact, thousands of Puerto Rican families had already found their home in Brooklyn after leaving the island. The first wave of Puerto Ricans reached there around the 1920s, west of the Navy Yard. The population grew quickly, expanding into areas like Williamsburg, from South 1st to South 5th Streets mainly, although for a while, the community stretched as far as South 9th. The south side of Williamsburg would come to be known as Los Sures, a thriving community filled with Puerto Ricans, similar to neighborhoods like El Barrio in East Harlem. Between the 1940s and the 1970s, about 150,000 Italians would also migrate to Brooklyn after leaving East Harlem, formerly known to many as Italian Harlem. The borough felt like its own world, a melting pot of different cultures. Every neighborhood that emerged from the early days of Brooklyn had their obstacles to overcome, and over the next few decades, many would face struggles with poverty, gang violence, drugs, and a rise in crime. And it only seemed to get worse with time. A lot of these areas were among the poorest in the city. The economic climate and lack of resources took a devastating toll on families already struggling in Brooklyn. Some of those struggles depicted in films like Just Another Girl on the IRT, Do the Right Thing, Everyday People, and documentaries like Los Sures. The films touch on racial tensions, growing up in the borough over the decades, and the widespread gentrification that would hit the borough. When it came to the arts, the 80s saw the explosion of hip-hop and its quick rise in popularity. But while the art form was born in the Bronx, Brooklyn's contributions can't ever be ignored. Huge hip-hop tours like Fresh Fest would be the first of their kind, and they would be sponsored by Swatch. It meant big business and exposure for hip-hop. The tour featured acts like Houdini, the Fat Boys, and Nucleus, who all had members that hailed from Brooklyn. Countless artists would help put the borough on the map when it came to hip-hop and R&B, with many of those artists still being referenced and respected today, also inspiring generations to come. Comedic heavyweights like Eddie Murphy and Chris Rock also come from Brooklyn, with Murphy being raised in Bushwick and Rock being raised in Crown Heights. Sure.
Okay, I'm gonna sound real dumb right now, y'all, but I did not know Eddie Murphy or Chris Rock was from Brooklyn. Brooklyn in the house for real. Let's go.
After his birth in South Carolina. The sounds and energy of hip-hop would be blended with heavier styles of music, strongly influencing other genres. Bands like Candiria, from Brooklyn, were inspired by hip-hop artists like Wu-Tang and Eric B. and Rakim, while also being influenced by bands like Metallica and Tool. It was an era of combining sounds and collaborations that many didn't expect. If your family was anything like mine in the 80s and 90s, you were taking a long trip on the train to visit Coney Island when the weather got warm. This is when the weirdos roamed under the boardwalk before it was filled with sand. when the boardwalk was lined with different arcades, when Astroland was still there.
If you wanna groove yourself,
Move yourself.
to the magic land, it's Astroland.
Astroland.
At Coney Island, feel the cyclone pass.
Touch the sky.
Gotta move those feet.
Come on, take a ride.
Astro.
Astroland.
At Coney Island.
Ride 'em all you want.
The famous Cyclone at Coney Island's Luna Park is a historical landmark and still operating and delivering fun times today. Dino's Wonder Wheel would be another main attraction, providing incredible views of the entire beach, the ocean, and even the Manhattan skyline in the far distance. Others might be visiting Brooklyn to check out the Botanic Garden for its huge collection of plants and educational programs, or maybe for the blocks in Bushwick, with every mural telling its own story. It's also a main hotspot for restaurants of all sorts. Many travel here for a taste of different cultures, some of which they can't find anywhere else. The borough offers something for everyone. Of course, I've only touched on a tiny bit of Brooklyn's history and some of the people and places from there. We would need a long time to discuss it all. Unfortunately, today we're here to discuss an event that would send shockwaves across the entire city, and it took place in the East New York section of Brooklyn, when one man would take 10 lives in a senseless and brutal act of rage. It was a major headline for the media, but for those affected, it was nothing more than the beginning of a long nightmare. On today's episode of Evil Intentions, this is Repose, the story of the Palm Sunday Massacre.
Get whatever you may need. And man, I just gotta say, y'all, that was a great little history lesson from Jose about Brooklyn. And I also will say, Brooklyn is one of those places in America, in the United States, that is on my bucket list of places I hope I will be able to visit one day. You know what I'm saying, man? It's right up there with Los Angeles. Everybody want to visit LA at least one time in their life, right? Or maybe that's just me. It's right up there with Los Angeles or Las Vegas. You know what I'm saying? And Brooklyn, New York City, period. But Brooklyn, most definitely. Anyway, let's get into the nitty gritty of the story.
Worst mass murder in New York City history. The brutal, shocking murders of 10 people, including 8 children, inside a Brooklyn home.
1080 Liberty Avenue is located in the East New York section of Brooklyn, New York. The strip is lined with different businesses, some of them still being operated by families that live nearby. Everything from pharmacies, grocery stores, clinics, and restaurants can be found. If you find yourself near Liberty Avenue and Hemlock Street, you notice how active the area is, similar to how it was back in the 80s. But the neighborhood was anything but easy to live in. It was an area where violence and drug use were all too common. In a lot of ways, seen as a place that had been decaying for years. By the 70s and 80s, the neighborhood was home to many Puerto Rican families. It was filled with mostly 1- and 2-family homes and mom and pop shops all over. Residents grew used to the area, and while some thought it was bad and becoming more unpredictable with time, there was a sense of community, with others feeling like things could be much worse. It was still home. According to reports, one person familiar with the area was a Puerto Rican man named Enrique Bermudez, born in Puerto Rico. He and his family, like many others, made their way to the Big Apple. He grew up not too far from Liberty Ave and had family who resided on Atlantic Avenue. He held a number of different jobs in Brooklyn. He worked for an agency that would rent cars and trucks out to car services. The 810 car service on Pitkin Avenue was a location that he worked and also drove a cab, but he stopped working there in September of 1983 since he faced some scary moments, like the time he was held up and had his car radio stolen. It really wasn't a safe job. Many other drivers experienced the same, and worse. But he was trying his best to work a normal 9-to-5 type of job, since in the past, he had made mistakes he wasn't always proud of. Selling and using drugs in New York City was commonplace. It could be very lucrative for anyone who decided they wanted to make quick and easy money. He found himself selling drugs, substances like cocaine and heroin, balancing the worlds of selling and his time being a husband and father. He had a son and 2 daughters. His first daughter, Betsy, was born on April 24th of 1969, with his second daughter Marilyn being born on July 23rd of 1973. When Betsy was just a young 5 years old, she would witness the downside of the drug trade, because on December 18th of 1974, Enrique and his then wife, the mother of his two daughters, were arrested for selling half an ounce of cocaine to an undercover officer. He would plead guilty in 1976, receiving a sentence of 5 years to life. It would later be changed to 5 to 15 years. He served about 5 of those years, being released on parole in April of 1981. Him and his then wife would separate after their run-in with authorities. Charges against her were dropped, and she would relocate to New Haven, Connecticut. After his release, the plan was to find work, which he did at the car service. Despite the bad moments at the job with holdups and his previous time in prison, after living in several different locations in Brooklyn, by February 29th of 1984, Enrique was able to purchase a small 2-family home at 1080 Liberty Ave.
Man, I hope Enrique don't go back to selling drugs and stuff, y'all, because that should be a lesson. Him selling cocaine to an undercover cop and having to go spend 5 years in prison, that should be enough. You know what I'm saying, man? I hope we not about to hear that he couldn't cut it in the real job field, so he fell back into the drug game. I don't know. Let's see.
With 4 bedrooms. Today, the ground floor of the location has been transformed into a local business. He paid $26,000 for the down payment on his home, while other reports say it was more like $50,000. Since he had quit his job in 1983, people who knew him from his previous work were confused at how he could afford such an amount. Many assumed he had money saved from his days selling, or had saved from his multiple jobs he had picked up over the years. He had also been driving for people and picking up customers on a freelance basis in his personal car, a 1975 Impala. By 1984, Enrique was in a relationship with somebody new, a woman by the name of Virginia Lopez. He loved his kids very much, and now he had his new relationship. Now this seemed to be a fresh start for everyone. Virginia had 2 children of her own, a 7-year-old named Eddie and a 4-year-old named Juan. Enrique's daughter Betsy would reside with him for some time in Brooklyn, while his younger daughter, Marilyn, lived in Connecticut with her mother, a very different environment than that of Brooklyn. She was a 4th grade student at Hill Central Grammar School. The children all got along, and by all accounts, this was a tight-knit family. Residents close by remembered seeing the family often, whether it was going to school or just handling everyday errands around the way. By April...
Oh, we gotta stop for a minute, my brothers and sisters. Hold up, y'all. Please don't tell me that Enrique done killed his kids plus the new lady kid that he with. Please don't tell me that's where we going in this story. I'm thinking that whoever did this, like, it was a random man killed and like random unrelated people to him. You know what I'm saying? Like he maybe went into and this sounds terrible too, maybe went into a daycare or something. I don't know, y'all, but they his own kids and stuff. I hope Enrique ain't going out like that. Enrique, please don't tell me it's so. Let's go.
April of 1984, the family was still new to the area, but they quickly adjusted. The Bermudez and Lopez children were known to frequently stop in at a small bodega located at 1087 Liberty Ave. The store had arcade machines inside, and a lot of kids spent hours on end there, sharing fun times and buying as much candy as they could. Others remembered them as a church-going Christian family who would attend Sunday services not far from their home. Good children and a good family that was polite even if they mostly kept to themselves. A man who owned a pet store in the area recalled a time when Enrique came into his store to purchase a 20-gallon fish tank and a bunch of goldfish. The store owner went over to 1080 Liberty Ave and installed the tank for the family. The children were said to be ecstatic over the new addition to the home. They really couldn't be happier. He was quoted as saying, "I brought the tank and put it in the living room. I keep seeing the faces of the kids. They were so excited about it." For some time, there were suspicions of what might have been going on at 1080 Liberty Avenue after the sunset. A truck driver who always delivered goods to the bakery right next door to the home stated that car service vehicles would stop at the location often, normally on Friday nights. Drivers would stop in briefly and then be on their way. This wasn't too weird because Bermudez had a past working as a cab driver, and he still had friends who did that job. But this was also known to be a common way of transportation for those who dealt narcotics, something he also did in the past. But one thing that couldn't be denied was that he cared for his family a great deal and was apparently working very hard to support them. But on April 15th of 1984, life at 1080 Liberty Avenue would take a shocking turn for the worst.
I'm serious, y'all. I did not think when we started this story, man, that I did not know that the person who was killing the little kids and the women was gonna be the damn daddy. Like, and I get it, y'all. I get it 100%. Yes, and I agree totally that it don't matter if he related to him or not. Murder is murder. But just for some reason, man, I just feel like it's a little extra like cherry on top of it, on top of the SHIT when it's your own damn children. And that's why I always say I hope it's a special place in hell for people who murder their children. Let's go.
It was the morning of Palm Sunday. Enrique, Virginia, their children, and other family members would attend Sunday services, and afterward, they would head to 1080 Liberty Avenue to have a family dinner. But instead of enjoying quality time with family, everybody in this home would end up being a part of one of Brooklyn's worst tragedies, and it would catch the entire neighborhood by complete surprise. Heavy rains and clouds hovered over East New York that day. After Sunday services, while the rest of the family gathered at 1080, Enrique and his young son would go shopping for some groceries, and after, they made a stop at his mother's home on Atlantic Avenue, one of the places that he resided in the past. It was about 6:40 p.m. when Enrique and his son would arrive back at their home to join the rest of the family. But when they walked into the home, they would find the entire family lifeless. Everyone in the home was dead. The home that was meant to host this family gathering was now a house of horrors, with blood covering the furniture and the floors. The victims
Okay, so maybe Enrique ain't do it.
were 7-year-old Eddie Lopez and 4-year-old Juan Lopez, Virginia's sons, 20-year-old Carmen Perez, a cousin of Virginia's, 5-year-old Alberto Maldonado, and 3-year-old Noel Maldonado, Carmen's sons, 14-year-old Migdalia Perez, Carmen's sister, 10-year-old Maria Isabel Perez, Carmen's cousin, 10-year-old Marilyn Bermudez, Enrique's daughter, who had been visiting from Connecticut, 14-year-old Betsy Bermudez, his eldest, and Virginia Lopez, Enrique's girlfriend, who was 6 months pregnant with his child. 10 bodies total, all family, 2 women and 8 children. Enrique would find himself running from the home in disbelief and screaming for help. His cries quickly caught the neighborhood's attention. Right next door to the home where the unthinkable had taken place was Rossi's Bakery at 1082 Liberty Ave. It was owned by a man named Carmine Rossi. Rossi was a business owner and also sang professionally at different Brooklyn nightclubs. He was in a band called Cool Change. He couldn't have expected what he'd soon become a part of. He was leaving the bakery at around 6:45 p.m. when he heard Enrique's screams. Within moments, he would fall into Rossi's arms, his face covered in tears, telling him that everyone in his home was dead. Confused and shocked at what he was hearing, he tried to bring Enrique back into the home with him to see what might have been going on, but he was far too distraught to re-enter. Rossi would head up the stairs and into the house, alone, witnessing the carnage for himself. He had never seen anything like it. Bodies were everywhere. There were no signs of life until he heard the cries of a baby, a 13-month-old child, and daughter of Carmen Perez, one of the victims mentioned earlier. The baby was covered in blood and crawling around in another room. Without thinking, Rossi grabbed the blood-soaked baby and quickly left the home, heading back to his bakery to call the cops. While he made that call, it would dawn on him that the person or people who committed this horrendous crime could have still been in another part of the house and done the same to him. Normally, he would have his registered firearm with him since he owned a business and wanted to be able to defend himself. But this evening, he left it in the store. That child that he took out of the home would be the only survivor. She was taken to the hospital by a police officer who carefully watched over her. Within minutes, the block was flooded with dozens of investigators from the 75th Precinct, all trying to discover who did this and why. They'd
Like, seriously, man, who did this and why? Like I said, y'all, and I'm not saying completely. I'm completely convinced that it's not Enrique, because Mike from that chapter got us like this yesterday, man. While I was thinking it was this person, then I started thinking it wasn't this person. Then come to find out it was that person. So I ain't gonna 100% say I don't believe it's him yet, but it's seeming like it's more than likely not gonna be him. So who the freak would do this? For somebody to do this to a whole family, and when I say family, I'm talking about the kids. All those kids, Jose just kept naming off child after child that this person freaking murdered. Like, for you to murder all those people, dude, you got time to stop and think about what the hell you doing. You know what I'm saying, man? You ain't just killing all these people and not knowing what the hell you doing. You get what I'm saying? Y'all ain't like he just killed 2 people real quick, then we're like, oh my God, I can't believe I did it. Dude, all those kids, man. And then I'm also wondering, y'all, the little 13-month-old that survived. Thank God that the baby survived. But did the killer know that did the killer let the baby survive, or did he not know that the baby was dead too? Is he maybe possibly be a relative of the baby? It don't freaking matter if he is or not. He already done killed all these other people. I don't know, my brothers and sisters. Let me just stop and let's keep going. This is crazy, man.
Walk into the bloodbath, where they found bodies on the couches, the floor, and the bed. From the start, Enrique's past with dealing drugs was brought into question, because they believed that this attack on his family might have been some sort of retaliation. They thought he was trying to get back into the drug trade, and in their eyes, it was, quote, clearly a message and a contracted hit. Maybe he rubbed someone the wrong way or stepped on someone's toes, but it was far too soon to tell. These were only theories. As they combed through the horrific scene, they'd find body after body, all of them with holes in their heads and faces. 19 shots in total were fired, said to be from 38 and 22 caliber weapons that were possibly equipped with silencers. They also found a small amount of lactose, or what might have been milk sugar, normally used to cut cocaine. They were found along with some foil packets that you would normally see drugs packed into. But the strangest part of all of this was how calm the scene was, as if there was absolutely no struggle or no attempt to run away. Most of them were sitting in chairs, and the TV was still blaring, with the dead sitting in front, like they were still watching. It was almost as if they were in a state of repose, relaxed, like they were asleep. There were traces of gunpowder and slight burning on the skulls and skin of the victims, indicating that the weapons were held very close to their heads when their lives were taken. One of the women killed was found with a cup of pudding in one hand and a spoon in the other, as if she had been feeding one of the children before being taken by surprise. Man. It was described as a real-life house of wax, filled with the lifeless. After finding shell cases and seeing how this crime was carried out, they were sure they were looking for at least 2 people who had done this. But at this point, there were no witnesses who saw anything. People who had heard the shots, however, stated that it was around 2 o'clock in the afternoon when it all happened. Hearing this sort of thing in that area was unfortunately very common. It was hard to tell where the shots even came from. The timeline made sense, since medical examiners would later determine it all took place around that same time. Over the next few hours, authorities would go from business to business, door to door, asking anyone they could more questions. They would also begin to take carts of items that were in the home, removing things like cameras, televisions, and other electronics. It was all considered evidence. They hoped that something, anything, would point them in the right direction. But all they were left with were theories, and a crime unlike any that they had ever seen. It left even the most seasoned detectives speechless and sick to their stomachs. They had thought they had seen the worst throughout their careers, but this topped everything. Mayor Ed Koch would visit the crime scene, seeing some of the bodies with his own eyes from the front entrance, addressing the crowd and media, letting them know that a $10,000 reward was being offered for any information. Everyone from Koch to the police commissioner to numerous camera crews were on the scene. The idea that anyone could do this, especially to innocent children, was just far too heavy, but they were determined to find out what led to all of this. Police barricades were set up outside of 1080 Liberty Ave, while officers stood watch, making sure that nobody went in or out. More and more residents who had heard of what happened crowded outside. They wanted answers just as much as anyone else. This was their neighborhood, and the people who did this could still be near. The entire community being left in disbelief was an understatement.
New York City police are investigating the mass murder of 10 people found shot to death late today in a Brooklyn home.
The worst mass murder in New York City history. The brutal shooting murders of 10 people, including 8 children, inside a Brooklyn home.
I don't think any of us has ever seen a shooting like this.
10 people dead, 2 women and 8 children. The children aged 3 through 14. One of the dead women was 8 months pregnant.
Most of the victims were sitting upright in chairs. In fact, one of them, I guess Mrs. Lopez, had in her hand a spoon and a can which looked like a pudding can with which she may have been feeding one of the children.
Seen 3 people sitting on.
I just gotta stop it real quick, y'all, because I'm trying to figure out who the freak could have did this. And it's taking me back to Enrique. Or at least somebody that they know, because we keep hearing about how they died. They didn't die like it was a struggle or they was running for their life or scared or nothing. The fact that this lady literally died while she was feeding one of her children. So whoever killed her, she was not threatened by them in that moment. They just probably just pulled out a gun real quick or something. You get what I'm saying, man? So it had to be something. It wasn't like somebody just burst into the house and just startled everybody and everybody panicked. No, people would sit up there watching TV. You know what I'm saying? So whoever, I'm going back to Enrique, y'all, or maybe it's another family member, but I'm starting to think there was a family member who did this and not just no strangers. I'm getting worried because I hope that we do come to a conclusion. I hope that this is not an unsolved mystery. Lord, please don't let it be an unsolved mystery, man. We need some answers, Bean Team. We need answers.
On one couch, the head's back a little bit. Then straight ahead of me, there was another couch with one girl on it. She looked like a teenage girl. And on my left, when I went into the room more, there was another couch and I seen 3 more people. Yeah. I don't know what was going on anymore when I seen all that. Like these, the Wax Museum.
Does this surprise you?
No, not at all. The way things are from a couple of years on, things are real horrible here in New York, all over.
You're dealing with a lot of people that are maniacs today.
We got to stick together and stop all this wildness, with drugs and horrible things like that, because we all have to live in this community.
It was after midnight before police began removing the bodies from the first-floor apartment in a poor section of Brooklyn. The victims included 7 children, 4 boys, 3 girls, ranging in age from 2 to teens, and 3 adult women. All were shot in the head at close range. A 2-year-old girl was found unharmed in the blood-bathed apartment. A relative said all were members of the same Puerto Rican family. The owner of the bakery next door, Carmine Rossi, called police after being taken to the scene of the massacre by the hysterically screaming husband of one of the women.
I looked in, there was a woman with her head up, and I went over and looked. I seen a bullet hole right here. And I looked straight across the other couch there. There was another young girl on the couch slumped over. I looked on the other couch. When I got in the room more, there was 3 more people slumped over on each other. Think of a horrid picture. That's what it looked like.
At the local police station, the mother of one of the children first learned that her daughter was dead.
Thank you, my baby.
Police say they have no motive for the killings, which one officer said may be the largest mass murder in the city's history. Richard Valeriani, NBC News, New York.
While the authorities were stumped looking for answers, the crime would leave residents shaken. People were afraid to leave their homes. Detectives went around the neighborhood for weeks after, looking for any clues or possible surveillance videos, even if they weren't as common as they are today. It didn't lead to anything. Residents were on high alert and wanted to know if they were safe. Business owners feared the worst. The tragedy and the news headlines were playing in the back of their heads. Investigators were convinced that this crime was possibly committed by Colombian drug dealers, since retaliation against women and kids was something that they had seen many times before. But when they questioned Enrique, He stated that he had no idea how this all could have happened. He wasn't in any type of war with any rivals. He was grieving and didn't want to speak to authorities anymore because he said he didn't know anything. A note on the home's front door would read, "This household is in mourning. If it is not of great importance, please do not disturb us." Throughout their investigation, it was said that Enrique was the target of frequent death threats while he was serving time years before this. This was apparently because he was accused of becoming an informant. This led them to believing he was holding back, and he knew more than he let on. But it was clear that regardless, he was a person distraught with grief, having lost his family. There were even times when authorities thought Enrique wasn't Puerto Rican at all. Maybe he was Colombian, posing as Puerto Rican in order to live freely in the States. But that wasn't the case. The community would become more and more enraged as very little went answered. They didn't want theories. They wanted the reason this all happened. So did these families. They denied the claims that Enrique was back in the drug game, and they had no clue who could have done this either. Even if he was back into that lifestyle, there wasn't any way for them to know. His extended family didn't live with him, and they weren't aware of his every move. After the slayings, relatives of the deceased poured into the 75th precinct. They would spend their time on the second floor of the precinct, normally reserved for the detectives unit, placing tearful phone calls to Puerto Rico to let all their families back home know of what had happened. The awful news consumed everyone. It was a complete nightmare to live through. Grandmothers and grandfathers would soon be on the next flights to New York City, taking last-minute trips to grieve with their loved ones. Between the 10 lives taken, funeral arrangements, and a profound and debilitating feeling of loss, it was just about the hardest thing anyone had ever experienced. One family member of Virginia's was quoted as saying, "If it costs my life, I'm going to investigate what happened to her." Authorities felt the same way. On Wednesday, April 18th of 1984, a wake was held for all 10 of the victims at Juan's funeral home on Liberty Ave, with more services held 2 days after at St. Michael's Church. The viewing was open to the public. The family did this in hopes that some who attended would see the impact this tragedy had on everyone, and if they knew anything, maybe this would move them to say something to authorities. Hundreds of people attended, everyone from family to complete strangers who were devastated after such a heinous event. 10 white caskets were laid out as the sounds of church bells tolling rang out for the entire neighborhood to hear. Grief-stricken family members approached each of the caskets in tears, still in disbelief that they were here for this reason. Little made sense, and the grief was all too real. On Good Friday, April 20th, the caskets were then taken to St. Michael's Church for the final service, where Reverend Philip Fabiano spoke to the church. He denounced the city's failure to put an end to the ongoing violence and the drugs that had been plaguing much of the city. He was quoted as saying, "The Palm Sunday massacre is not an isolated event. It is part of an epidemic of drug-related crime. On a national level, where the resources are massive, the response is minimal. We have an administration that flexes its muscles against the poor, the hungry, and the powerless. It is either silent or ineffective when confronted by local death squads that roam our streets." After the services, a procession followed as family and friends of the victims made their way to Cypress Hill Cemetery, where 8 of the 10 victims would be buried. A local business by the name of North American Monumental Works on Liberty Avenue would donate 8 tombstones for the 8 children who lost their lives, each standing at 30 by 24 by 12 inches, along with the names and birth dates of the victims inscribed on each. Sisters Betsy and Marilyn Bermudez were buried at St. Bernard's Cemetery in New Haven, Connecticut, where their mother resided. The crowd gathered around the 2 caskets quietly, everyone shedding tears and dropping bouquets of flowers as they said their final goodbyes. A reverend sprinkled holy water on the small caskets, and each time he did, their mother let out loud screams and cries, struggling with the fact that she would never see her daughters again. She would say, "Oh my God, I want my children back. I want my little girls back." Enrique was, of course, also there, with about 100 others, all family and friends. The heartbreaking last moments sending these girls off was just about the worst thing that any parent could ever experience. The burial of the innocent women and children was just the beginning of a long grieving process. Everyone was distraught. Some fainted from becoming so overwhelmed. And one of the hardest parts of it all was knowing that there were absolutely no answers, no justice. But that would all change just about 2 months later.
Please let me hear the change, man, because I ain't gonna lie, y'all. I'm getting a little anxious right now, man. Like, I'm getting a little flustered because I'm getting worried that we not gonna find out who the freak did this. Please. And I'm sticking to it, y'all. I think it's freaking Enrique. I can understand the drug dealer theory, whatever, you know what I'm saying? Some drug cartel had a hit out on his family because of something he had going on. But I don't know, man. I don't know if I'm riding with that. I'm riding with that I think is Enrique. And then he got the audacity to show up at all their funerals.
On the evening of June 19th of 1984, word would begin to make its way around Liberty and Sutter Avenues. Word that someone was in custody for what took place on April 15th. Little by little, more and more people made their way to the 75th precinct, where this supposed suspect was being taken. Residents yelled at cops to leave whoever it was with them, vowing to take care of him themselves. They didn't want him arrested. They wanted him to pay. Officers were forced to come outside and guard the station, worried that these people might make their way in and follow through with their threats. The crowd grew larger and larger until finally a police cruiser pulled up to the precinct and they brought the suspect out of the vehicle in handcuffs as the crowd continued to scream. The person in custody was a man named Christopher Thomas, an ex-convict from East 169th in the Bronx. According to reports, Thomas and Enrique knew one another from a partnership that involved dealing cocaine. They were low-level drug dealers. Thomas was already in custody in the Bronx on charges that he was attempting to violate one of his own relatives. By this point, several people had spoken to authorities since it all happened, and that information wasn't public yet. They mentioned seeing Thomas near 1080 Liberty Avenue between the hours of 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. on April 15th. Another witness stated that they looked through a window shortly after the shots rang out, and they saw Thomas standing over some of the bodies in one of the 4 bedrooms. Those same witnesses would be the ones to pick him out of a lineup. A tip also came into 911, telling authorities that Thomas might have been responsible. Enrique, who stated he didn't know anything before, began to open up and talk to police. This would have been after the Brooklyn District Attorney granted immunity, because by this point, it was clear to authorities that he still had some sort of hand in dealing drugs. When he started to talk, he would also mention the name Christopher Thomas, someone he only met about 1.5 years before this. This is when it all started to add up. Authorities were also led to Thomas's mother-in-law, who was the owner of a home that Thomas and her daughter previously lived in. The home had been badly damaged in a fire, and it was boarded up, but she gave them her consent to search the home. It was here that they would find another shell casing, and it was fired from one of the same guns used in the massacre. They knew they had him, and he was formally charged with the slaughter of 10 innocent people at 1080 Liberty Ave. Now, they were sure they had who was really responsible, but what was the reason behind all of this? It turns out, the real motive for this senseless tragedy was jealousy. Thomas, said to be on drugs during all of this, had become furious when he assumed that his wife was sleeping with Enrique. It was stated that about a month before the slayings, Thomas and his wife got into a violent dispute because she went over to Enrique's house without him. During that fight, he pulled out his weapons and asked his wife to take her life while he would take his own. It was clear that this was a lot more than just jealousy. He was deranged and hell-bent on catching his wife in a lie, and there was no evidence it was ever even true. But his rage was well documented. He had 8 prior arrests, some of them for very serious reasons. Way back on April 25th of 1970, he was arrested for the shooting of his then-girlfriend because he mistakenly thought that she was cheating on him. He did 3 years for the shooting. In 1981, he was arrested for the killing of a New Jersey woman, for which he was acquitted. Another arrest was for the slaying of a man in the Bronx. He was acquitted of that too.
Okay, god God damn it! How many times this man been accused of murdering people or attempted murder or whatever, and he getting away with it, getting acquitted and stuff. And he got a real freaking problem, man. He think people be cheating on him so bad till he feel like if he one of them type, if you cheat on me, I'll kill you. You know what I'm saying, man? You know how your mama tell you, I brought you in this world now, I'll take you out. He don't give a damn if he brought you in here or not, man. If his motto is, if you my girlfriend and you cheat on me, I'm gonna freaking kill you. And that's just freaking crazy on one end, but the other end is that he more than likely just being paranoid about most of this stuff. You know what I'm saying? Just freaking crazy. And on the other end, what the freak do she cheat on you got to do with them 8 kids you killed? Why are you taking that out on them? This man is freaking crazy, y'all, and I was wrong. I really thought it was Enrique, or thought at least he would have something to do with it, but apparently not. This dude, and this is the part that pissed me off. This could have been prevented. If you just think about it, long story short, short story long, y'all. This whole thing, this could have been prevented. He should have been locked up. How many times this man got charged with freaking killing people, attempting to kill people, whatever, and he get acquitted? Wow, man.
On April 8th of 1984, just a week before the massacre, Thomas would yet again viciously beat his wife in a jealous rage. She was able to get an order of protection, but it stopped nothing. He smashed the window to the apartment they shared on Woodcrest Ave in the Bronx and continued to beat her, dragging her out of the home into the street, where he continued his attack. For this, he was released on a $500 bail. On April 14th of 1984, one day before the massacre, Thomas broke into Enrique's home, thinking his wife was there, thinking he would catch them sleeping together, hoping to take them both out. He had no real reason to even believe that this was happening, but he was fueled by rage just thinking about it. Enrique denied ever having any relations with Thomas's wife, and given his history of making assumptions, it's safe to assume it wasn't true. Just hours before the massacre, on April 15th, Thomas went back to 1080 asking Enrique for money and drugs. Obviously, this didn't sit well with him, given the stunt that Thomas had pulled the day before, especially since the man already owed him thousands of dollars. Enrique gave him 3 grams of coke and $50, vowing to never do business or give him anything again. This exchange was said to be what set the entire thing in motion. He would return just a few hours later, breaking into the house and taking everyone's life in cold blood. He stole a few ounces of cocaine and somewhere between $600 and $800, and then he left. The worst massacre in this city was all fueled by jealousy. Authorities were right about the drugs, but there was no war with Colombians, no drug lords putting out hits, and no posing as citizens to blend in. It was just one monster's hatred and his rage that led to this. Headlines across the city talked about the arrest, and the community felt a little more at ease knowing that this man was off the streets. But residents wanted more than that. They wanted street justice. Even if they didn't know this family personally, the family was shown a lot of support. Many were vocal about wanting him to pay for his actions. Enrique watched the news of Thomas's arrest with Carmine Rossi, yelling out that he would love to get his hands on him for what he did. On one hand, he was happy about the arrest. On the other, he felt guilty about it all and wanted to get his hands on him to make him pay himself. He knew the situation was already getting out of hand once the cheating assumptions were made. That's why he didn't want to do business or interact with him anymore. But he still never thought that it would ever escalate to this. He also wasn't aware of his full history of violent behavior. He really didn't know Christopher Thomas at all. On September 10th of 1985, Christopher Thomas was sentenced to a maximum of 250 years in prison for carrying out the Palm Day Massacre. His charges of murder, however, were lowered to manslaughter, meaning that under the law, he would only have to serve 25 to 50 years. This was because his lawyer stated that he was extremely emotionally disturbed and binging coke when he did what he did, which meant if he survived, he would one day be released back into the world. And on January 6th of 2018, that's exactly what happened.
I'm done. I'll talk to y'all later, my brothers and sisters. I am fucking done. I'm done. I'm cutting this fucking video off. What in the fucking shit? Jose Ortiz has the most uncanny way of pissing me the fuck off in these damn videos. I had to listen even harder, y'all. I had to listen even clearer. Are y'all fucking serious right now? This man murdered 10 people. 8 kids, 2 women on some crazy jealousy ass tripping out shit, and he is free right now. He got the sentence of 250 years, but they dropped it from murder to manslaughter because he was high and tripping off drugs. I don't give a fuck what he was tripping off of. Are you... I can go on and on, my brothers and sisters. I seriously can go on and on, Bean Team. I'm not even finna do it, man. What? I did not think we was gonna get to the end. This whole video just fucked me up from the beginning, y'all. This video just fucked me up, man, from the beginning, man. I knew it was gonna be a tough one. And Jesus Christ, we get to the end and it hit you like one of them Mr. Ballins. Like, Jesus, what the hell? He got away with it, Let's go.
Christopher Thomas, now in his 70s, is a free man after being released on good behavior, free to live the rest of his life, while 10 innocent people lie in their graves for the last 40 years. I know people might hear these stories and wonder why we're still talking about it all this time later, and there's a very simple answer for that. When these monsters are put away, it should stay that way. A lot of families out here grieve every day over horrific events just like this one. Understandably, families would rather move on and put these nightmares behind them. But what happens when these people are free? Imagine having something like this happen and hearing that the people or person who did it are now roaming the streets, where you can just bump into them at any time. How is that fair? Does that mean that anyone can just get away with anything, no matter how heinous it is, all because they say they were on drugs when they did it? How many times have people been released after doing something like this, only to do it again? It's important to keep remembering, because over the next few years, you will no doubt see a lot more of this. And that's not justice. That's pouring salt into an open wound. And it's these families that are left in fear and reliving the entire ordeal all over again. The sole survivor of the massacre didn't know the truth about what happened to her family until she was about 10 years old. For a long time, she assumed her mother passed away from asthma, since she was told that she suffered from it. It was a girl in her school who mentioned what really happened, and when she got back home, upset at what she was told, her grandmother let her know the truth. She pulled out a suitcase filled with newspaper clippings, finding out for the first time that her mother and 2 siblings lost their lives that day. Siblings she never knew she had. The police officer who looked over her the night that it all happened would be a strong presence in her life going forward. She was there from the very start, always stopping by the home in Washington Heights where she was being raised by her grandparents. The officer would often stop in and leave gifts and cash to help out with expenses. They became even closer over time, and because of this, the child's grandparents had one very important request: that the officer help raise her, since they were getting older and wanted her to have someone in her life that she truly trusted. After the child's grandmother passed away, the officer followed through, officially adopting her, further strengthening their unbreakable bond. That young survivor is now 41 years old.
Wow.
If you ever find yourself in this area of Brooklyn, take a moment to think about what happened here, about those who lost their lives, and the immense impact it had on the entire city. It might have just been a news headline for many, but for these people, the people who live in this area, the ones who still remember, it always stayed with them, and the kind family who lived at 1080 Liberty Avenue will always be remembered. Rest in peace to all who lost their lives on April 15th of 1984, and my deepest condolences go out to these families, friends, and anyone else affected. You aren't forgotten.
Rest in peace to all them, y'all. Just first and foremost, all 10 of those victims, man. Rest in freaking peace. And it was nice at the end to hear about the little baby who survived, ended up getting adopted by one of the cops and all that. That's like a feel-good story. But I'll be lying to y'all if I ain't telling y'all that I'm pissed the fuck off right now. I am pissed the fuck off. I'm gonna be pissed off for the rest of the night. Shit, probably the rest of the damn week, man. Jose, I'm telling y'all, man, I done picked up on Jose with this now, y'all. Jose have a very uncanny way of pissing you the freak off with his videos, man, because he cover a lot of these stories where these people be getting off from the most craziest freaking crimes. How, like, is this real life? Am I alive? How in the freak could this man be out? I don't give a damn that he old and gray now. He should have been locked up for the rest of his life. And I feel like he one of the ones, if anybody, whether you agree with the death penalty or not, he should be at the top of your list. If you is gonna give somebody the freaking death penalty, it should be him. You know what I'm saying? And then not only did he not get the death penalty, he ain't even in damn prison no more after killing goddamn 10 people. What the fuck? That is some of the most craziest bullshit ever, man. Just ever fucking, y'all. And only, what his name? I don't even remember his name. I think his name was Cassie. Whatever your name is, I hope you watching this video, because I just want to tell you this, and it's some real shit, buddy. We all gotta die one day. We all gonna die one day, buddy. And once your ass finally do croak over, you gonna go meet your maker. And like I said at the beginning of the video, I hope when you do meet that maker, you wish you never met him. You wish you never freaking met him, man. Oh my God, y'all, I'm starting to give myself a freaking headache. This shit's so much bullshit. I digress, my brothers and sisters. I'm gonna let y'all go now, man. If we have been here long enough, I know we over an hour into this video. It was a great, long, lengthy video from our boy Jose Ortiz, man. I always love coming back to his channel. I appreciate y'all coming on back as always. Before y'all leave, y'all know, just make sure you please hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and do all that if you ain't did that yet. And tomorrow, it is another Coffee Man Friday. But until then, my friends, please, y'all, remember this, man. Remember freaking this. Love, peace, and happiness. Stay safe. Don't stop. Keep going. Yeah.